Wesley Ardith slept in a horse stall and ate what the boarders left. He was 13 years old, and the man who owned the livery charged him rent for the stall he already mucked out with his own 2 hands. Think on that. The boy cleaned the stall. The boy fed the horses. The boy pitched the manure and forked the hay and hauled the water. And at the end of every week, Harlan Muth held out his hand and took coins the boy had barely earned for the privilege of sleeping on the same straw the boy had spread. Wes never once complained. He only counted the days. Counted them under his breath in the dark, the way another child might count stars, because every day was a day closer to getting his sister well. And then, one gray afternoon, a dusty stranger dropped a leather pokefat with $200 in gold in the mud of the alley, and never felt it fall. The boy could have kept it. God knows he needed it. The doctor wanted $12 his sister did not have, and here was $200 lying in the muck with no name on it and no eyes upon it. But that is not the boy this story is about. This boy ran, barefoot, 3 streets, after a man he owed nothing. If you believe kindness never goes unnoticed, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one still mean something to you, take a second and subscribe, and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story rides tonight. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. It was the spring of 1879, in a wind-scoured cattle town called Dry Fork, out in the Wyoming Territory, where the freight road cut the sagebrush like a scar. It was not much of a town. A single crooked street of gray board buildings. A general store. A saloon with a false front taller than the roof behind it. A church that doubled as a schoolhouse when the preacher was sober. And at the low end of the street, where the road bent toward the river, stood the Dry Fork livery stable, and that stable was the whole of Wesley Ardith's world. He had come to it 2 years before, a boy of 11 with a little sister by the hand, and nothing else in the world but the clothes on their backs. Their mother had gone in the winter, coughing. Their father had gone the spring after, thrown from a green horse, and never woke up. There had been no kin to send for. There had been only the county, and the county meant the orphan farm out past the river, and Wes had heard enough about that place to know he would rather die than let them take Pearl there. Folks who came back from the county farm did not talk about it. Folks who did not come back were talked about in low voices, and then not at all. So when Harlan Muth had looked the ragged boy up and down on the boardwalk that first cold day and said he might have work for a strong-backed pup who didn't eat much, Wes had said yes before the man finished speaking. He had not asked about wages. He had not asked about a bed. He had asked only one thing. My sister comes too. Harlan had spat in the dust and looked at the little girl, small and pale and holding a rag doll with one button eye. She earns her keep, or she goes to the county, he'd said. That's the whole of it. And Wes had said yes to that too, because a boy of 11 with a sister to keep does not get to be proud. Pride is a coat for men who have somewhere warm to hang it. The work was hard, and it never stopped. Wes was up before the sky went gray, mucking the 12 stalls, forking the soiled straw into the barrow, wheeling it out to the pile behind the corral where it steamed in the cold. He hauled water from the well one heavy bucket at a time, 20 buckets, 30, until the trough was full and his shoulders burned. He curried the boarders' horses and picked their hooves and rubbed down the ones that came in lathered off the freight road. He climbed the tall ladder to the loft and pitched hay through the trapdoor. He greased harness. He mended halters. He shoveled and lifted and carried from dark to dark, and when the last chore was done and the last lantern out, he climbed the ladder again to the loft where his sister waited, and that was the only good hour of his day. Because whatever the town saw when it looked at Wesley Ardith, and the town saw a gutter pup, a nobody, a bit of dirt that walked, the horses did not see that. The horses saw something else. There was a way the boy had with a frightened animal. A green colt that pinned its ears and struck at any man who came near would stand quiet as a church when Wes laid his hand on its neck. A mare that had been beaten by some previous owner, that trembled and rolled her eyes at the sight of a raised arm, would lower her head to the boy's chest and breathe slow. He never used the whip that hung by the door. He never raised his voice. He talked to them low and steady, the way you'd talk to a child waking from a bad dream. And they trusted him. Every horse that ever came through the Dry Fork livery trusted the boy the town overlooked. Harlan Muth noticed, the way a man notices a tool that works well, it made him money. A colt that Wes gentled sold for more than a colt that was still half wild. A boarder whose horse came back calm and glossy paid his bill, and came again. But Harlan never once said a kind word about it, because a kind word cost nothing, and Harlan Muth did not give away things that cost nothing. That was his whole nature, if you want to understand him. He measured every man by his coat. A man in a good coat was a man to bow to, a man in a poor coat was a man to squeeze, and a barefoot orphan in a shirt worn thin as paper was, to Harlan, simply free labor that had not yet figured out it could leave. Now the day I mean to tell you about began like all the others, gray and cold, with the wind coming off the sage. Wes was in the third stall with the fork when he heard Harlan's voice out on the boardwalk, loud and pleased with itself, the voice Harlan used when he had an audience. There were 6 men loafing along the boardwalk that morning. There were always men loafing along the boardwalk in Dry Fork, men between one thing and nothing, chewing and spitting and watching the street for something to happen. Harlan liked an audience the way some men like whiskey. It warmed him. It made him bigger than he was. Boy. He hollered, "Wesley, get out here." Wes set the fork against the wall and came out into the gray light, and he knew from the tilt of Harlan's hat what kind of morning it was going to be. Harlan stood with his thumbs in his vest, rocking on his heels, and the 6 men were grinning already, waiting for the show. "You count the feed sacks like I told you?" Harlan said. "Yes, sir, 11, sir, same as the delivery." 11? Harlan let the word hang. Now that's a curious thing. Because I could swear we bought 12. He looked at the loafers and back at the boy, and his voice dropped into something that was meant to be heard by all of them. "You wouldn't know anything about a missing feed sack, would you, boy?" There had been no missing feed sack. Wes knew it, and Harlan knew it, and Harlan knew that Wes knew it. That was not the point. The point was the 6 men on the boardwalk and the pleasure of putting a boot on a small neck in front of them. "No, sir," Wes said quietly. There was 11 off the wagon. I can show you the tally on the doorpost. He can show me the tally. Harlan grinned around at his audience, and one of the loafers laughed obligingly. "Listen to me, boy, and listen good, because I'll only say it the once. You handle gentlemen's horses. Fine animals worth more than your whole rotten little life, and there's a cash drawer in that office with money in it that men worked for. Now I've had a gutter pup handling gentlemen's property before, and I know how the story ends." He leaned down close, and the smell of him was tobacco and old sweat. "You touch that till, boy, you so much as breathe on that till, and I'll have the sheriff nail your hide to my door before you can cry for your mama. You hear me? A gutter pup like you, they'll believe me over you every day of the week and twice on Sunday." Wes looked at the boards under his bare feet. He did not answer, because there was no answer that would not cost him. He had learned that. When a man like Harlan wanted to hurt you in front of others, the only thing you could keep was your quiet, and so he kept it, and he counted in his head, not the money, he had none of that, he counted the days. And when Harlan finally tired of it and waved him back to work, Wes went back to the third stall and picked up the fork, and his hands were steady, and up in the loft he could hear his sister coughing. That cough. Lord, that cough. It had started in the deep of winter, small and dry, a thing you could tell yourself was nothing. But it had not gone with the winter. It had settled in and grown, down deep in the child's chest, a wet, rattling thing now that shook her whole small body and left her gasping. Pearl was 8 years old, and she was the size of a child of 6, and lately she did not come down from the loft much at all. She lay in the hay with the horse blanket over her, her rag doll in the crook of her arm, and she watched the dust turn in the light that came through the gable, and she coughed. Wes climbed up to her at the noon hour, when Harlan went to his dinner and the stable was quiet. He brought her what he had: a heel of bread, a bit of cold bacon he'd saved from his own plate, a tin cup of water from the well. He sat beside her in the hay, and he put his hand on her hot forehead, and it was hotter than it should have been. "You feeling any better?" he asked her, though he knew. "I feel fine," Pearl said, and then the cough took her, folded her up small and shaking, and it went on until Wes thought it would never stop, and when it finally eased, she lay back gray-lipped and spent. "I feel fine," she said again, in a whisper, because she was 8 and she had learned to lie to make her brother easier, the way he lied to make her easier, the way the poor teach each other to lie kindly. "When it's warm, can we go outside? I want to go outside again." "Soon as you're well," Wes said. "Soon as you're well, I'll take you down to the river, and we'll put our feet in. I promise you that. You promise. I promise." He had 40 cents. That was the whole of his fortune in this world, 40 cents in old coins tied up in a scrap of rag and pushed deep under a loose board in the loft where Harlan would not find it. He had saved it a penny and a half penny at a time over more than a year, going without, and it was meant to be the beginning of something, a stake, a road out. He was never sure exactly what, only that it was theirs, and it was hope, and it was tied in a rag. 40 cents. And the doctor wanted $12. He had gone to the doctor. Of course he had gone. 2 weeks before, when the cough first turned wet, Wes had walked up to the far end of the street where Dr. Amory Pruitt kept his rooms above the apothecary, and he had knocked, and he had stood there in his thin shirt with his hat in his hands and asked the man to come see his sister. Dr. Pruitt was not a cruel man exactly. He was a careful man. He was a man who had been burned before by folks who took his doctoring and then vanished on the debt, and he had made himself a rule, and he lived by his rule the way small men do, as though the rule were a kind of virtue. "What can you pay?" the doctor had asked, not unkindly, over the top of his spectacles. "I don't have it now," Wes had said. "But I'll work it off. I'll muck your stable, I'll haul your water, I'll do whatever you say for as long as it takes. My sister's real sick, sir. She needs a doctor." "Everyone's sister is real sick, son," Dr. Pruitt had said, and he had said it tired, the way a man says a thing he has said too many times. "My fee is $12 for a house call and a course of medicine. That's not a hard heart, that's a ledger. If I dosed every child in this county on a promise, I'd be the one starving inside a month. Bring me $12, and I'll come directly. I'll even come at night. But bring me the $12 first." And he had closed the door, gently, which was somehow worse than if he had slammed it. $12. It might as well have been 12,000. Wes had walked back down the street doing the arithmetic that had no answer, 40 cents and a promise against $12 and a rule, and there was no way through it that he could see, and he was 13 and he carried it alone. That was where things stood, the boy squeezed to the wall, the sister burning up in the loft, the doctor's door shut on a rule, on the gray afternoon that a stranger rode into Dry Fork. Wes was at the trough with the water bucket when the man came down the street at a walk. He noticed the horse first, the way he always noticed horses before he noticed men. It was a grulla, a mouse-gray horse with a black mane and a dark stripe down its spine, the color of smoke and iron, and it was, Wes saw at once, a very good horse. Not flashy. Nothing about it was flashy. But it was deep through the chest and clean in the leg, and it moved with that long, easy reach that a horseman will pay real money for, and it was tired now from the road, but not used up, because it had been ridden by a man who knew how to spare a horse. Wes knew all of that in the first 3 seconds, the way you know the things you have loved your whole life. The man on the grulla's back was a different story. He was worn down to nothing to look at. Dusty from hat to boot, a week of trail dust caked into every crease of him, a growth of gray shot beard, a coat gone shapeless with weather. He rode slouched and easy, and he looked like 100 other men who drifted through Dry Fork on the freight road, broke drovers between one outfit and the next, men with a horse and a saddle, and nothing else. He looked, in a word, like a man of no account. And in Dry Fork that was the same as being invisible. He drew up at the livery and looked down at the boy. "You the hostler here?" "I do the horses, sir." "Mister, Muth owns it." "You wanting to board?" "Just the night." "Grain her good. She's come a long way." The man swung down stiff, the way a man gets down after long hours in the saddle, and he stood a moment holding the horn to let his legs remember they were legs. "What's the charge?" "2 bits the night with grain, sir." The man dug in his pocket and came out with silver, real silver, and counted it into the boy's palm, and Wes noticed that too without thinking anything of it, that a broke drifter paid cash and did not haggle. But mostly Wes was looking at the horse. He took the reins and ran his hand down the grulla's sweaty neck and the horse, tired and strange in a strange place. Leaned into him the way they did. "She likes you," the stranger said. It was the first thing in his voice that had any color to it. "She's a good one," Wes said, and he meant it as high praise, the highest he had. "You take care of her. Anybody can see that." The man looked at him a moment, an odd, level, quiet look, and said nothing to that. He unbuckled his saddlebags and threw them over his shoulder and started off up the street toward the saloon and whatever supper a town like Dry Fork could offer a man of no account. And Wes led the grulla in and did what he'd said. He rubbed her down proper, working the dried sweat out of her coat until it lay smooth, and he picked all 4 feet. And he gave her a good measure of grain and clean water, and forked her fresh straw, better straw than Harlan would have wanted spent on a 2-bit boarder. He did it because the horse deserved it. That was all. There was no one there to see him do it, and he did it right anyway, which, if you are paying attention, is the whole of who the boy was, told in one small act in an empty stable. And it was while he was bent over the near hind foot, cleaning it out with the pick, that Wes saw the boots. He would not have thought a thing of it any other day, and he did not think much of it that day. But the stranger, dismounting, had put a foot up on the trough's edge to knock the dust from his trouser cuff, and for just a second, under a week of caked trail grime, the boy had seen the leather of that boot. And it was fine leather, not a working drover's cheap stovepipe boot, cracked and greased and mended. This was a boot that had been made for one man's foot by a good hand, hand-lasted, the stitching close, and even, the kind of boot that cost more than Wes might see in a year. It was buried under so much dust that you would never see it unless you were down low the way a boy is down low, looking at the world from the height of a horse's foot. Wes saw it. And he thought, distantly, and then he thought about the horse's hoof, and then he thought no more about it at all. You, though, you are meant to see it. Hold on to that boot. Hold on to the grulla too good for a broke man, and the silver paid without a quarrel. Set them on the shelf in the back of your mind. Because the town of Dry Fork is not going to see any of it, and the boy is too tired and too worried to add it up, and that is the whole terrible pleasure of what's coming, that you will know before they do. Now here is where it turns. The stranger came back for his saddlebags in the late afternoon, near dusk, meaning to take a room at the boarding house and leave the horse the night. He came into the alley beside the livery where the light was going blue and thin, and he settled the bags behind his saddle where it hung on the rail, and he did whatever a man does, and as he turned to go, something worked loose. Later Wes would understand it. The man had loosened a strap to shift the bags, and a poke that had ridden inside one of them slipped its mouth, and a leather sack tied at the neck slid out and dropped, and landed in the churned mud of the alley with a sound too soft to hear. And the stranger, his mind on supper, and a bed, and the long road behind him, walked on up toward the boarding house and did not feel it gone. Wes found it a minute later, coming out to fetch the empty grain sack. His barefoot near stepped on it. He bent and picked it up out of the mud, and it was heavy, heavy in that particular dense way that only one thing in this world is heavy, and he knew before he ever loosed the string. He loosed the string anyway. He had to see. Gold. Double eagles. $20 gold pieces. More of them than he had ever seen in one place in his whole life, more than he had ever imagined touching. He tilted the mouth of the poke to the last light, and the coins gleamed dull and yellow and impossible in the dusk, and his hands began to shake, and he sat right down in the mud of the alley with the sack in his lap because his legs would not hold him. $200. He counted it later, but he knew it near enough by the weight. $200 in gold, in his two hands, in an empty alley, with the light gone blue, and nobody in the world watching. And here I want you to sit in that alley with him. Because this is the moment the whole story turns on, and it is worth sitting in. $12. That was all it took to bring Dr. Pruitt to the loft at a run. Day or night, he'd said it himself. $12 out of $200, and the doctor comes tonight, and Pearl gets her medicine, and Pearl stops coughing, and Pearl goes down to the river in the summer and puts her feet in the water like Wes had promised her. $12. It was nothing. It was a corner of one coin. And there was more than that in it, if a boy let himself think. Harlan owed money. Everybody knew it. The whole town knew Harlan Muth was mortgaged to the bank up in Cheyenne and sweating his note. 600 and some, folks said. With what was in this sack a body could... No, Wes did not even let that thought finish. But the other thought, the small one, the $12, that one would not leave. It sat in his chest, and it was the sound of his sister coughing, and it whispered that no one saw, that the man was rich enough to drop $200 and not feel it go, that a rich man would never miss 12 out of 200, that God himself might have put this in the mud of the alley for a reason, might have set it down right where a desperate boy would find it. Because a desperate boy had prayed. Nobody saw. That was the thing that whispered loudest. Nobody in the whole world saw. Wes sat in the mud, and he shook, and he held $200 in gold, and his sister coughed in the loft above him, and no one would ever know. I told you at the start what kind of boy this was. I told you he ran. But I want you to understand what it cost him to run. Because a thing given up easy is not much of a gift. This gift cost the boy everything he had and everything he needed, and he gave it anyway. He got up out of the mud. He pulled the string tight on the poke, tight and hard as if the coins might spill his resolve out with them. And he ran. He ran up the alley and out onto the street with the sack clutched to his chest in both arms, and his bare feet slapped the cold-packed dirt, and he did not stop to put on the boots he did not own, or the coat he did not have. Up the street, past the general store with its windows going dark, past the saloon with its yellow light and its noise. 3 streets in a town that had barely 3 streets to run, his breath tearing at him, the cold air knifing his lungs, because somewhere ahead was a man walking to a boarding house who did not yet know he'd lost a fortune, and the boy meant to catch him before he did. He caught him at the water trough in front of the boarding house. The stranger had stopped to let his horse, no, the horse was stabled. He had stopped only to wash the road off his own face and hands before going in to supper, bent over the trough in the last of the light. And Wes came pelting up out of the dusk, gasping, and skidded to a stop, and held the sack up in both hands the way you'd hold up something in a church. "You dropped this, sir." He could hardly get the words past his breathing. "In the alley. It come loose off your saddle." "It's all here. I counted it twice so you'd know I never took none of it." "I counted it twice, sir. It's all here." The stranger straightened slowly, water running off his beard, and looked at the boy, and then at the sack, And then he put his hand to where the poke had ridden and found it gone, and his face did something quiet. He took the sack. He hefted it and loosed the string and looked in, and Wes stood there with his chest heaving and his heart going like a hammer, waiting. For what? For thanks, maybe. Not even for thanks. Just to be done. Just to have it back in the right hands and be quit of the terrible thing it had asked of him. The stranger looked at the boy a long moment. Then he reached into the sack and drew out 2 of the gold pieces, $40, more money than Wes had ever held that was his own to keep, and he held them out. "Take it," he said. "A man who runs 3 streets in his bare feet to hand back what he could have kept, that man's earned a reward. Take it, son. It's yours." And here is the line that folks in that town would repeat for years after, the thing a barefoot orphan said to a stranger at a horse trough in the blue dusk. The thing that maybe you'll remember too. Wes shook his head. He put his hands behind his back like a child refusing sweets, and he said, "No, sir, I only run because it was yours. It wouldn't be right to take money for bringing a man his own." He swallowed. "I ain't got much, mister, but I got that it's yours. And I reckon that's worth keeping." The stranger stood very still. "What's your name, boy?" he said at last, and his voice had changed, though Wes was too spent to hear how. "Wesley Ardith, sir, Wes. The man said it like he was setting it down somewhere to keep. You go on home, Wes, get warm." And that was all. The boy touched his forehead, the way you'd tip a hat if you had a hat, and he turned and walked back down the darkening street toward the livery and the loft and his sister, having given back $200 and $12 worth of his sister's life along with it, having taken nothing, not even the thanks, because he did not stay long enough to be thanked. He just went home to Pearl. He did not see what the stranger did next. But I'll tell you, because it matters. The man stood at the trough and watched the boy walk away into the dark. And halfway down the street, at the mouth of the alley where all of it had started, Wes stopped. There was a dog there, a stray, a starved yellow thing all ribs and sores that hung about the town and belonged to nobody and got kicked by everybody. It came out of the shadow toward the boy, low and hopeful. And Wes, who had a heel of bread in his shirt pocket that was to be his own supper, the only supper he was going to get, took it out and broke it in 2 and gave the dog half. Squatted down there in the cold and fed a stray dog half of the only food he had, and rubbed its bony head and said something to it too low to hear. And then he went on into the dark. The stranger saw the whole of it, filed it away with the boy's name. Then the stranger went in to his supper, and in the morning, before the town was well awake, he saddled the good Grulla himself and paid his bill in silver and rode out of Dry Fork heading east and north, toward the Powder River country. Though nobody in Dry Fork marked which way he went or cared. A drifter had come and a drifter had gone. That was all the town knew. You know more. You know about the boots and the horse and the silver and the $200 a broke man could afford to drop. You've done the sum the town hasn't. But hold it a while longer, because the boy's troubles were not over that night. They were about to get a great deal worse. And the money he'd handed back at the trough was going to come back to haunt this story, dollar by dollar. In the days ahead, every one of those dollars a stone laid on a boy's chest. Because one of those 6 loafers had been standing where he could see up the alley, and what he had seen, in the blue dusk, was the stable boy sitting in the mud with a fat leather sack in his lap and gold shining in it before the boy got up and ran. That was all he'd seen. He had not seen the running. He had not seen the trough or the trough refusal or the 2 coins pressed and turned down. He had seen the gold and the orphan, and he had gone into the saloon and had a drink on it, and he had talked. And by mid-morning the next day, with the stranger long gone east, the story that was moving through Dry Fork was not the true one. The true one, the boy who ran 3 streets to give a fortune back, was known to exactly 2 people, and one of them had ridden away at dawn, and the other one would not speak of it. The story moving through the town was uglier, and it was simpler, and it was the kind of story a town like Dry Fork liked to believe about a gutter pup. The story was that the orphan had gold, and when that story reached the one man in town who had been waiting his whole mean life for a reason, Harlan Muth heard it, and his eyes went bright. And he came looking for the boy. He found him at the trough, the same trough, filling water buckets in the cold morning light, with the 6 loafers already gathering on the boardwalk, because word had gone ahead of Harlan that there was going to be a show. "Wesley Ardith," Harlan said loud, so the whole street could hear it. "Where is it?" Wes straightened up with the bucket in his hand. "Where's what, Mr. Muth?" "The gold, boy, the gold you were seen with. Fat sack of it, up the alley, last evening." Harlan came across the mud with his thumbs hooked in his vest and his chin thrust out, and his voice climbing with every step, because the audience was there and the audience was watching. "I warned you. Didn't I warn you? In front of these very men, I warned you what I'd do if you put your thieving hand where it didn't belong. And not 2 weeks gone, here you are, a gutter orphan, sitting in gold like a king. Where'd it come from, boy? Whose till? Whose pocket? Whose saddlebag?" And Wes stood there with the water dripping off the bucket, and every eye on that street on him, and he had a choice. He could tell it. He could tell the whole of it, the dropped poke and the run and the 200 handed back, and maybe someone would believe him. But to tell it was to tell a stranger's private business to a mean man and a gawking crowd. It was to say aloud that a drifter had ridden through carrying 200 in gold, and Wes did not know that man, did not know his business, did not know who might be listening, or what a mean man might do with the knowing. The money had not been his to take. And it seemed to the boy, standing there in the mud, that it was not his to talk about either. A thing given back in the dark ought to stay in the dark. That was some deep, stubborn decency in him that the town had no name for and would only read as guilt. "There wasn't any gold that was mine," Wes said quietly. That was all he would say. "I never stole from you or anybody, Mr. Muth. I never touched your till. That's the truth, and I'll say it plain. But the rest of it isn't mine to tell. Isn't yours to tell." Harlan turned to the boardwalk, arms spread, playing to the house. "You hear that? Isn't his to tell. That's the sound of a guilty tongue, boys. That right there." He came the last 2 steps and took the boy by the collar of his thin shirt, twisting it tight, and Wes did not fight him, only held the empty bucket and looked at the man steady. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do, boy. I'm going to walk you up this street to the sheriff, and I'm going to have you searched, and I'm going to have you charged. And that sister of yours up in my loft eating my hay, she goes to the county farm today. You hear me? Today, this morning. I've carried the 2 of you long enough, and this is my thanks, thieving in my own yard." He shook the boy by the collar. "The county wagon for the girl, and the sheriff for you. That's how this ends for gutter pups. I told you. Didn't I tell you?" And Wes, with the man's fist at his throat and the whole town watching and his sister coughing in the loft above them all, Wes still would not say it. He shut his mouth on the one thing that might have saved him, because it wasn't his to tell, and he let Harlan Muth march him up the street toward the sheriff's office with the 6 loafers trailing behind to see the orphan get what a town had always known an orphan would get. Up in the loft, over the empty stalls, a little girl coughed and pulled her one-eyed doll close and did not know that a wagon was already being talked of that would carry her away from her brother. And somewhere out east on the freight road, riding the long miles toward the Powder River under a wide cold sky, a dusty stranger who was not what he seemed carried a boy's name set down careful in his memory. And did not yet know, could not yet know, how much that boy was about to lose for having done. In an empty alley, in the blue dusk, with nobody watching, The one right thing. The sheriff was not in. That was the first mercy of that long day, though it did not feel like one. Deputy Coles sat on the step whittling, and he heard Harlan out, and he looked at the boy a long while. He knew Wes. Everybody in Dry Fork knew Wes. He'd seen the boy carry water for old men and gentle horses that would let no other hand near them, and he was not a hard man, only a tired one, and he did not want to put a 13-year-old in the one cell they had over a rumor a loafer carried out of a saloon. "You got the gold on you, boy?" he asked. "No, sir," Wes said. "I ain't got it. I never had it to keep." "He spent it," Harlan said. "Or hid it. Search him. Search that loft." So they searched him. There in the street, with the town watching, the deputy turned out the boy's pockets, and what fell into the dust was 40 cents in old coins tied in a rag, and nothing else. 40 cents. The deputy looked at that little knot of copper and worn silver a long moment, and something in his face changed, and he did not look at Harlan when he spoke. "That ain't $200, Harlan. He's hid the rest." "Maybe," Coles said, and he tied the rag back up and put it in the boy's hand and closed the boy's fingers over it. "But I ain't charging a child on a maybe. You bring me a man that saw him take it, and saw where it went, and I'll act. Till then, go on home. All of you. Go on." But Harlan was not finished. Because Harlan never was. He could not charge the boy. But he owned the loft, and he owned the stalls, and he owned the girl's roof, and a small, cruel man will always find the corner where his little power still stands. "Fine," he said. "The law won't have him. But I'll have my yard back. I've got the county wagon coming Thursday for the girl, and this thief and his sister are off my property by then. I've carried them long enough." He turned to the boardwalk, to his audience, and lifted his voice. "Thursday, you all hear it. Thursday the county takes the girl, and the boy can sleep in the road." And he walked back down to his livery, and the 6 loafers drifted after him, and the day went on, and Wes stood in the empty street with 40 cents in his fist, and Thursday hanging over him like a raised hand. He went back to the loft. He climbed the ladder slow. And Pearl was worse. He knew it the moment he heard her. The cough had changed. It had gone down deeper, wetter, and it did not stop when she was done coughing, but kept on in little pulls, like she could not get to the bottom of a breath. Her cheeks were flushed a bad color. Her eyes were too bright. She was 8 years old and the size of a child of 6, and she reached up her hot little hand and took hold of his sleeve. "You were gone long," she said. "I know it. I'm here now. Did you get in trouble?" "No," he lied. "No trouble." She smiled and shut her eyes, and the doll with one button eye lay under her chin, and Wes sat down beside her on the hay and did not let her see his face. That night he went to the doctor. Dr. Amory Pruitt had a good house at the top of the street, a house with real glass windows and a lamp in every one, and Wes stood on the porch and knocked with a hand that would not stay steady. When the doctor came, he came in a clean coat, and he looked down at the barefoot boy, the way a man looks at weather he'd rather not go out in. "My sister's took bad," Wes said. "Real bad, sir. Her breathing's gone down in her chest, and she's burning up, and I can pay part now, and the rest I'll work off. I'll muck your stable. I'll cut your wood. I'll do whatever you say for however long you say. Only please come look at her tonight." "The fee is $12, Pruitt said. "For the call and the course of medicine. That's the fee for everyone, son. I can't run a practice on promises. Bring me $12 and I'll come directly. I got 40 cents. Then I'm sorry." And he was, a little. You could see it cross his face, quick, and then close over, the way a shutter closes. It was not that he was a monster. It was worse than that. It was only business to him, the same as a bill of goods, and a dying child was on the wrong side of the ledger, and he shut the door soft and turned down his lamp. Wes stood on the porch in the dark. $12. He had given back $200 in gold had been in his two hands, in an empty alley, with nobody in the whole world to see, and any 12 of it would have bought the doctor's coat and his lamp and his medicine, and had him up in that loft within the hour. He had run 3 streets to give it back. He had counted it twice, so a stranger would know he was honest. And now his sister could not breathe, and the honesty sat in his chest like a stone he had swallowed. He did not curse it. That's the thing you have to understand about the boy. Another child might have raged at the sky and called himself a fool. Wes only stood there and thought, quiet and plain, it was still his money. It wasn't mine to keep. And he went home to his sister with 40 cents. The next morning, he took his father's knife down to the mercantile. The one thing of his father's he had left, a bone-handled knife his father had carried through the war, and he traded it for a bottle of the cheapest fever syrup on the shelf. He spooned it into Pearl through the day. It brought the fever down a little. It did not touch what was under the fever, and by the 3rd day he could count her ribs when she breathed, and the syrup was near gone, and he had spent everything a boy could spend, down to a bone-handled knife and 40 cents in a rag. It was that same 3rd day the word came around about the horse. A hostler passing through from the eastern range stopped at the livery to grain his team, and he heard the loafers still chewing on the story. The orphan and the gold, the drover on the good grulla, the sack of double eagles nobody could find. And when they got to describing the stranger's horse, the grulla with the black points and the fine plain saddle, and mentioned the one word the man had let slip when he'd paid. The 2-word outfit he ran. The broadaxe. The hostler set down his bucket and went the color of ash. "Say that again," he said. "That brand." "Broadaxe. Why?" The hostler looked at the men on the boardwalk, and he looked down the street toward the livery loft, and he did not say what he was thinking to the boy who most needed to hear it. He said it to the barroom. That night, over a glass his hand was not quite steady around. "Broadaxe is Cyrus Halloran," he said. "That's the biggest outfit north of the Platte. That man runs cattle from here to the Montana line, and banks in Cheyenne and Chicago both. Whatever rode through here on a grulla and let a boy hand him back $200, boys, that was no drifter." And the rumor turned over in the night. It ran under the whole town like water under ice. Harlan heard it. The deputy heard it. The doctor heard it. But nobody yet had put it together in the daylight where it could do the boy any good, and up in the loft Wes heard none of it. Because Wes was not in the saloon. Wes was sitting a fever watch and had no more attention to spare the world. By the end of that week, Harlan had made up his mind on a bigger thing than the boy. He had a note, $600 and some he owed the Drovers and Cattlemen's Trust, and it was called, and he had 20 days to clear it or lose the livery, and he had gambled and drunk his margin thin and could not raise it. So he did what such men do. He sold. He found a buyer out of Buffalo who wanted the corner and the stalls, and he shook hands on it, and he set the closing for Thursday morning. The same Thursday the county wagon was coming for Pearl. He came up to the loft to tell the boy himself. He enjoyed it. You could see he enjoyed it. "Thursday," he said, standing at the top of the ladder, not troubling to come all the way up. "The yard's sold Thursday. New man wants it clean. The wagon takes the girl to the county farm Thursday morning, and you'll shift for yourself. I'd have thought a boy that came into $200 could afford better than my hay, but there it is." He looked at the child in the straw, the flushed face, the little rag doll, and he felt nothing that showed. "See, she's ready to travel. County don't like a fuss." And he climbed back down. That was the night of the 40th cent. Wes went out in the dark and spent his last 40 cents, the coins that had fallen in the street, the coins the deputy had folded back into his hand, on a paper of fever powder from the back door of the mercantile, the cheapest thing that might do any good at all. He carried it home in his fist. He climbed the ladder. He stirred the powder into a cup of water warmed against his own chest, and he lifted his sister's head into his lap, and he got it into her a sip at a time through the long middle of the night. He did not pray for gold. He did not pray the stranger back, or the $200, or a way to make Harlan pay. It never entered his head to bargain for himself. He only bent over his sister in the straw, with his last coin spent and Thursday 2 days off, and asked, in the plainest words a boy has, that she keep breathing till morning. That was the whole of it. Keep her breathing till morning. He held her head in his lap, and he watched her chest go up and down, and he counted her breaths the way he'd once counted a stranger's gold, and somewhere past the middle of the night her fever broke a little, and she slept, truly slept, and Wes did not. Wes sat and held her, and watched the one square of loft window go from black to gray to the first thin blue of a day that was coming for him too, though he did not know it, and could not have believed it if he had. Thursday dawned cold and clear, and the first thing that came into Dry Fork that morning was not the county wagon. It was a sound. Wes heard it before the town did, because Wes was awake, and the loft window faced east. A low sound, far off on the freight road, under the last stars. Not one horse, not two. Many, a long rolling thunder of hooves, and under it the creak and rattle of a wagon, and it grew, and it grew, and the loft floor began to hum with it. He laid Pearl down soft in the straw and went to the window. Out on the eastern rise the dust was coming up gold in the first light, a great cloud of it. And out of the cloud came riders, rank on rank of them, and a chuck wagon rolling in the middle, and every horse under every man moving at the same easy road gait of an outfit that has come a long way and means to arrive together. He could not count them, 30, 40, more. And on every flank, plain as print in the low sun, the same burned mark, a broad axe. The town woke to it all along the street. Doors opened. The loafers came out on the boardwalk in their shirts. The deputy came out, pulling his suspenders up. And Harlan Muth came out of his house in his good vest, buttoning it, sure as sunrise that the thunder on the road was the law come at last to haul the thieving boy away in front of everybody, and pleased as a man can be to have front row seats to it. The county wagon rolled in from the north end at the very same time, a hard-faced woman on the seat and a driver beside her, come for the girl. And Harlan's buyer came up from the hotel with his papers under his arm, come for the yard. All three arrived within the same few minutes, in the same cold gold light, the wagon for the child, the deed for the livery, and out of the east the great dust cloud nobody understood, and for one held breath it looked to Wes, watching from the loft, like the whole world had sent its collectors at once. Then the broadaxe rode into the mouth of the street, and slowed, and came on down toward the livery, and stopped. 40 saddle hands. The chuck wagon. Horses blowing and stamping. And at the head of them a man on a fine grulla with black points, the same grulla, the very horse Wes had watered right, only the man on it was not dusty now. He was clean-shaved. He wore a good dark coat and a good hat, and he sat that horse like a man who owned the ground it stood on, which, near enough, he did. And Wes, at the loft window, felt the whole bottom of the morning drop out of him, because he knew that face. Duster gone, week of trail dust washed off, but he knew it. It was the drover. It was Coy. A big man swung down off a bay at the head of the column before anyone else could move. Broad through the shoulders, gray in his mustache, a trail foreman's hard flat voice, Boone Deckeser, though the town did not know his name yet. He stepped up onto the boardwalk in his spurs, and he ran his eye down the row of gaping loafers, and Harlan in his good vest, and the deputy, and the county woman on her wagon seat, and he raised his voice so it carried the length of the street. "I'll ask it once," he said, "and I'll have a straight answer. Which of you is the stable boy?" Nobody spoke. The town stood there. "The boy," Deckeser said again, louder, that run 3 streets in his bare feet last week, and caught up my employer at the water trough and handed him back a poke with $200 in gold in it, every coin, and would not take one thin dime for the doing of it. Which of you is that boy? Speak up. Mister, Halloran has come a long way to shake his hand. And the whole street turned. Every face on that boardwalk, every loafer that had trailed after Harlan to see the orphan get what an orphan gets, every one of them turned and looked up at the loft window of the livery, where a thin barefoot boy stood white as paper with his sister's fever cup still in his hand. Harlan's mouth came open. And shut. And opened again. And no sound came out of it. Cyrus Halloran got down off the grula. He got down slow, and he handed his reins to the nearest hand, and he took off his hat, the cattle king, the biggest man north of the Platte, standing bare-headed in the muddy street before a livery loft, and he looked up at the boy, and his hard face was not hard at all. "Come down, Wesley Ardith," he said. "It's all right. Come on down." Wes came down the ladder. He came down into a silence you could have heard a pin drop into, past the empty stalls, out into the cold gold light and the smell of 40 horses, and he stood in front of the man in his bare feet, and he did not know what to do with his hands, so he held the fever cup in both of them. Halloran looked at him a long moment. Then he spoke, and he did not speak only to the boy. He turned as he said it so the whole street would have it plain. "My name is Cyrus Halloran," he said. "I run the Broadaxe off the Powder River, and once a year I put on an old duster and a week of dirt, and I ride my own country where no man knows my face, because a rich man gets lied to, friends, from sunup to sundown, and I wanted to know one true thing. I wanted to know who a man is when he thinks there's nothing in it for him, when there's nobody watching but his own conscience." He looked back at Wes. "In 20 years of doing it, I have had men rob me, and lie to me, and flatter me, and try to sell me horses gone in the wind. And in 20 years, not one living soul, rich nor poor, ever chased me down to hand me back what I'd dropped. Not once, till a stable boy in Dry Fork run 3 streets on his bare feet to give a stranger back $200, and counted it twice so I'd know he was honest, and would not take a coin for it. And when I asked him why, he told me, and here the big man's voice caught, just slightly, and he steadied it. He told me, 'I only run because it's yours.'" Somewhere in the column of Broadaxe men, a young hand spoke up, not loud, but in the quiet it carried. "I seen him. That same day," the hand said. "After. At the alley mouth. He had a heel of bread, looked like all he had, and there was a stray dog, near starved, and the boy broke that bread and give the dog the bigger half. I seen it. Weren't for show. Weren't nobody watching but me, and I was behind a wagon." He shrugged, awkward under the town's eyes. "I just thought somebody ought to say. It weren't a one-time thing with him. That's how the boy is." And the street was very quiet. Halloran turned then, and for the first time he looked full at Harlan Muth in his good vest, and at the county woman on her wagon, and at the man with the deed under his arm, and he took the whole thing in. The wagon come for the girl, the buyer come for the yard, the trap laid for 2 orphans on the same cold morning, and something went across his face that was not soft at all. "Now," he said, "let's set some things right, and let's do it here, where it was done wrong." He looked up at the boardwalk. The doctor. "Which house?" they pointed. And Halloran sent a man for Pruitt, and Pruitt came, hurrying now, coat half on, and the cattle king counted gold into his hand in front of the whole street. "You turned this boy from your door for want of $12, with his sister dying," Halloran said, not raising his voice, which made it worse. "There's 100. You'll go up that ladder now, and you'll tend that child like she was the governor's own, and you'll not leave till the fevers beat. And 2 of my riders are already gone for the best man in Cheyenne, who'll be here by tomorrow's stage. You understand me?" "Yes, sir," Pruitt said. Yes, Mr. Halloran, and he went up the ladder with his bag, fast, and the door of that little argument closed. And up in the loft a small girl who had waited so long for a doctor finally got one, bought and paid for over the head of the very man who'd refused her. Then Halloran turned to Harlan. Harlan had got some of his color back, and some of his tongue, and he tried it. Mr. Halloran, sir, I'm the owner here, and I want you to know, that boy, I took him in, I gave him a roof, out of Christian. You charged an orphan rent, Halloran said, on a stall he mucked for you free. I heard about it before I ever dropped a coin in your mud. The whole street heard you call him a gutter pup this very week, and threaten his sick sister with the county farm, and try to have him jailed for a thing he'd done the opposite of. He let that sit. You've a note on this place, $615, to the Drovers and Cattlemen's Trust, called and near due. That right? Harlan's face worked. How do you? I bank at the trust, Halloran said mildly. I own a good piece of the trust. Yes, that's right. He nodded to Decky, sir, and the foreman brought papers from a saddlebag. I've bought your note this morning, Muth. I own it. And the livery with it. I've bought it over the head of this gentleman here from Buffalo, who I'll make whole for his trouble, and who I'd guess would as soon do business with a man who keeps his word. The buyer from Buffalo, a sensible man, tucked his own deed back under his arm and stepped well clear of Harlan. So here is how it stands, Halloran said, and now he did raise his voice, so the boardwalk would carry every word of it home. I could ruin you, Muth. I could call this note and put you in the road with nothing, the way you meant to put these children this morning. That's the easy thing, and there's men here would cheer it. He shook his head, slow. But I didn't come to Dry Fork to break a small man. I came to thank a good boy. So I'll not beat you, and I'll not turn you out with nothing. I'll only do this. He handed Harlan a folded paper. That yard's mine now. And its keeper, in law, on that paper, signed and witnessed, is Wesley Ardith, my ward. The gutter pup you charged rent. He runs it. And if you want to board a horse in Dry Fork, Muth, you'll bring it to that boy, hat in hand. And pay him honest rates, and speak to him decent, in front of these same men that watched you drag him to the sheriff. That's your ruin, not your pockets, your pride, in daylight, before every soul you played the big man to. He looked at the loafers, the 6 of them, hanging back now, not one of them meeting the boy's eye. That's the whole of it. I'll not say another word to you, and that was worse for Harlan Muth than any beating could have been. A blow he could have carried like a badge. But to stand in his good vest in the street he'd lorded over, and be handed not ruin but a mercy he did not deserve, and know that every man who'd trailed him up to gawk at the orphan had watched him get it, that broke something small and mean in him that never quite mended. He took the paper. He did not read it. He turned and walked back toward his house, and the boardwalk let him go by in silence, and not one man went with him. Then, out of the crowd, an old teamster stepped down into the street. Bent, gray, hands like knots of rope. Wes knew him. Everybody half knew him, old Amos, who hauled water and freight and slept where he could, and whom the town looked past the same way it had always looked past the boy. I'll say my piece too, the old man said, since it's a morning for it. He put his hand on Wes's shoulder. This boy carried water up my hill 3 summers when my back give out and I couldn't do it, and he never once let me pay him, and I ain't got much to pay with. He'd say the pump was on his way, which it wasn't. It was 3 streets out of his way, every day. He looked around at the loafers, the ones who'd called the boy a thief. You all knew this boy. You knew him. And you was ready to hang him on a saloon rumor because he was poor and had no daddy to speak for him. Well, he's got somebody speaking now, and I'm glad to be one of 'em, late as it is. And the loafers who had called Wes a thief looked at their boots, and one of them, the very one who'd carried the tale to Harlan, went red to his collar and turned and slipped away, and the town stood in its own shame in the cold morning and had nothing to say. Halloran crouched down then, to be level with the boy, the way you do with a child or a skittish colt. "Well, Wesley," he said, quiet. Just the two of them now inside all that stillness. "You gave me back $200 and it cost you near everything, and you never once tried to tell a soul who I was to save your own neck, though it would have cleared you in a minute. My foreman told me you sat in that sheriff's mud and wouldn't name my business. Why not, son? Nobody'd have blamed you. Weren't mine to tell," Wes said. "A man wants to ride quiet. That's his to keep. You give me your name for the poke and nothing else, and I figured you had your reasons." He looked down. "And it weren't never about clearing me. It was about Pearl. Long as she could get well, I didn't much care what the town made of me." Halloran was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to give you a place, boy, a real bed, under a real roof at the Broadaxe. Wages a man'd be proud of. Your sister doctored proper, and schooled and kept warm through every winter she's got. And a horse of your own, I had in mind that grulla you watered, seeing as the two of you took to each other." He watched the boy's face. "What do you say to it?" And Wes, who had never in his life been given a thing, who had learned so young and so hard to expect nothing that he could not rightly take it in, Wes did not whoop or grab at it. He looked up at the man, and the only thing he could think to ask for, the only thing his whole heart had room for, was the same thing it had held all along. "Would Pearl be kept warm?" he said. "That's all I'd want, mister. She's had cold so long. If she could just be kept warm." And that near-finished Cyrus Halloran, who had faced down blizzards and rustlers and bank panics and never wept in 20 years. He put his big hand on the boy's head, and he stood up, and he had to look off down the street a moment before he could speak. Then he turned to Deckeyser and said, "Rough, paint the sign." They painted it that afternoon. Where it had said Muth's Livery and Feed, it said, before the sun was down, Ardith Livery, Broadaxe, the boy's own name, up over the door he'd mucked for scraps, in letters a foot high, for the whole freight road to read. Halloran mounted up when it was done. He gathered his 40 riders and his chuck wagon, and before he rode, he took off his hat once more to the town of Dry Fork, but it was to the boy he spoke. "I thank you, Wesley Ardith," he said, loud, "for all of them. Not for the money. Any fool can hand back money. I thank you for reminding a hard old man that there's still such as you riding in this country, folk that'll do the right thing in an empty alley with nobody watching and nothing to gain. That's worth more than my whole herd. Don't you ever let this town, nor any other, teach you different." And he turned the grulla, and the Broadaxe rode out the way it came, into the west. And the dust went up gold behind it, and Harlan Muth watched it go from his window, and had no note over his head anymore, and no yard, and no boy to lord it over, and nothing at all to show for a lifetime of measuring men by their coats. The doctor from Cheyenne came on the next day's stage. Pearl's fever broke for good inside the week. By the time the aspens turned, she was up and about, thin still, but breathing clean, and by the first snow she was strong. 1 year on, it was spring on the Powder River. The Broadaxe Range ran green to the foot of the mountains, and the creeks were up, and the whole country smelled of new grass and cottonwood. Behind the good log house they'd given the Ardith children stood a white fence, and along that fence, that morning, ran a girl of 9, lungs clear as a bell, hair flying, laughing fit to burst, chasing a shaggy stray dog that had followed a wagon all the way west from Dry Fork and never once been sent away. Pearl still had her doll with the one-button eye. She kept it on the sill of a window that looked at mountains now, instead of a livery loft, and down at the corral, taller by a hand, filling out through the shoulders, sat a boy on a fine grulla horse with black points. His own horse, that knew his hand, reined up quiet at the stirrup of Cyrus Halloran, while the old cattleman showed him how to read a brand and cut a cow and know good grass from bad. Wes sat that horse easy. He was learning the broadaxe from the ground up, the way a man learns a thing he means to be worthy of. And he was still, at bottom, the same boy. He still watered every horse right. He still looked past no one. He still expected nothing, and was quietly astonished every single morning to wake up warm. As for Harlan Muth, they say he took work down the road at a lesser stable in the next town over, a hand now where once he'd been an owner. And they say he hauls his own water there, and boards his own poor horse, and measures every man that rides in by the cut of his coat, same as he always did, and waits on no one but himself, and is waited on by no one at all. The smallest hand can carry a thing too big for the richest to lose. A boy with 40 cents to his name gave back $200 in gold because it wasn't his, did it in the dark, with no one watching, expecting nothing, and it came back around to him at dawn, multiplied past all counting, in a form he never once thought to ask for. That's the whole of it. Not that honesty always pays. Sometimes it costs you near everything first, but the doing of the right thing in the empty alley, the quiet decency nobody sees, that is never as invisible as a hard world would have you believe. Somebody, somewhere, is always watching. And once in a great while he rides a good grulla horse and remembers your name. If a boy's honesty ever cost him everything and then paid him back at sunrise, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story rode.